This dog saved a baby's life. The truth will shock you. It was 3:14 a.m. when the first scream rang out, piercing the silent suburban night. The dog, an old, scruffy mutt with a patched coat of gray and black, jerked its head up, ears pricked, every muscle tensed. In the darkness, its eyes flashed with alertness that bordered on terror. There was something wrong in the house, something so wrong that it sent an electric current of urgency through the dog's entire body. It didn't hesitate. It sprang into action, paws skidding across the hardwood floor as it sprinted toward the origin of that terrible, desperate cry. A baby's cry. For any passerby looking up at the modest two-story home from the street, nothing seemed amiss. The lights were off, the curtains were drawn, and the moonlit was as ordinary as every other house in this quiet neighborhood. But inside, an unseen drama was unfolding, one that would forever change the lives of the people who dwelled there, and the lives of countless others who would hear of it afterward. Because on this night, that scruffy old dog would do something that would stun the entire community and spark a series of events that no one could have predicted. People would say it was a miracle. Others would call it fate. Still others would insist it was mere coincidence. But to those who witnessed it, especially to the mother who slept upstairs, it was an act of pure, selfless heroism. The dog's name was Scout. At least that's the name the family had chosen when they found him shivering behind a dumpster, ribs visible through his ragged fur. He had been astray for who knows how long, bearing scars of a life lived in alleyways and side streets. But from the moment Mark took him in, Scout had become an integral part of the household. Perhaps it was the gentle way he nuzzled their hands for comfort, or how he curled up by the fireplace at night. Maybe it was the unwavering loyalty that showed in his eyes whenever they spoke his name. Whatever it was, had been the first to say, "He's perfect for our home." And soon, Scout was no longer just a stray dog but a beloved member of the family. He had a plush bed by the back door, a squeaky toy shaped like a bone, and a water bowl that read "Good Boy" in large, playful letters. More importantly, he had love, real love, for the first time in his life. But this night, he wasn't just a pet. He was on a mission. The baby's name was, just 8 months old, with bright eyes that reflected the innocence of the world he was only beginning to discover. Until that shriek cut through the stillness of the early morning, had been sleeping peacefully in his crib. Had tucked him in hours earlier, checking to make sure he was warm enough, that the monitor was on, and that his pacifier was clean. The nursery was awash in soft blues and greens, with stenciled clouds drifting across the walls, a little mobile of cartoon dogs spinning lazily above the crib. It was a room that spoke of safety, comfort, and love. But behind that veneer of security, something lurked, an unseen threat that would strike without warning and without mercy. Scout burst into the nursery, nails scratching the polished floor, as cries took on a new, fearful pitch. The dog's keen sense of smell and razor-sharp hearing caught something that most humans would have missed. A low hiss, so faint it blended into the hush of the night. A swirling shadow near the baseboard heater, beneath the crib's edge. Scout's eyes pinpointed the source as soon as he crossed the threshold. A snake, coiled in a tight spiral, just inches from where his tiny hand had slipped between the crib's bars. The snake's head was raised, forked tongue tasting the air, eyes fixed on the small, vulnerable shape above. Flailed, perhaps stirred awake by some primal fear, his cry escalated, carrying raw terror that no baby should ever feel. The snake tensed, and Scout knew, somehow, instinctively, that if he didn't act, the baby's life would be forever changed in the next heartbeat. There was no time to bark for help, no time to run to the parents' bedroom. All that existed was that single moment, pregnant with danger. Scout leaped, jaws snapping in midair, intercepting the strike that was aimed at the baby. A swirl of moonlight caught the gleam of fangs. A yelp shattered the air. And then silence. Awoke to the sound of chaos. Cries, a fierce snarling, and a wet thud against the wall. Her maternal instincts kicked in instantaneously. She grabbed the baseball bat she kept under the bed, an odd habit she'd had since she was a teenager, and bolted down the hallway, hair disheveled, heart hammering. She practically slammed into the nursery door, breath ragged, eyes darting to find the threat. Scout stood at the center of the room, blood matting the fur around his neck, the dead snake lying limply between his paws. Was shrieking, red-faced and quivering. It took a moment to process what she was seeing. When it clicked, her adrenaline soared to new heights. She raced to the crib, scooped into her arms and rocked him as tears poured down her face. Her eyes then landed on Scout, who stared back at her with unwavering loyalty, but also with pain clouding his gaze. He'd been bitten. The puncture wound was evident, 2 small holes on his muzzle, already swelling. The snake's fangs had found their mark. Without hesitation, she screamed for Mark. Within seconds, the house was ablaze with lights. Mark rushed in, confusion etched on his features. Then he saw the snake. He saw the blood. He saw Scout listing to one side, whimpering softly. Panic flooded Mark's expression. "Oh my God," he whispered, grabbing the baseball bat from trembling hands and giving the dead snake a wide berth. "We have to get him to a vet." "Now," nodded, her tears still flowing, her mind spinning. "I'll get him," Mark said, fumbling for his phone with one hand while gently taking the baby from. "You grab Scout. Let's go." In a flurry of trembling hands, hushed sobs and frantic phone calls, they rushed to the nearest emergency vet. The drive felt endless, a surreal stretch of darkness punctuated by red traffic lights that refused to turn green fast enough. Held Scout on her lap, applying pressure to the wound with a torn piece of cloth. The dog whimpered, tail thumping weakly against her leg. She whispered reassurances, voice quivering with desperation. "Hang on, buddy. Please hang on." In the back seat, wailed in Mark's arms. The baby was uninjured, but the shock of the night had shattered the serenity of his world. And so the car sped on, hazard lights flashing, all hearts pounding with the singular hope of saving their furry hero. At the emergency vet's clinic, fluorescent lights buzzed overhead as a team of professionals whisked Scout away. Forms had to be filled, insurance details clarified, but couldn't think of any of that. All she could think about was that loyal dog, the dog who'd risked his life to save her baby from certain tragedy. She could still see his pleading eyes, trusting her to fix this, trusting her to make the pain stop. Minutes turned into hours in that waiting room. Mark tried to soothe with a bottle and soft lullabies, though each attempt felt hollow, overshadowed by the tension that suffused the air. His mind swirled with questions and worst-case scenarios. Snake venom was no joke, especially with a strike to Scout's muzzle. What if it was too late? What if no amount of antivenom could pull him through? She prayed silently, hands clasped, eyes misty. She offered up every ounce of her gratitude, for the baby's life, for Scout's bravery, for the chance, please, please, for Scout to survive. When the vet finally emerged, her face was a guarded mask of professional composure, rose so quickly she nearly stumbled over a chair. Is he okay?" The vet exhaled gently. "He's critical, but we're administering the antivenom. He has a strong pulse, though he's lost a fair amount of blood. We've stabilized him for now, but the next few hours will be touch and go." It wasn't a definitive yes, but it wasn't a tragic no either. It was all needed to collapse into the chair, tears streaming down her cheeks. Mark placed a comforting hand on her shoulder, his own eyes rimmed with anxiety. They spent the rest of the night in that stale, fluorescent-lit room, dozing fitfully, baby clutched to their chests, waiting, praying that Scout would pull through. Morning came, dim and subdued through the clinic's windows. A nurse gently informed them that they could see Scout, though only for a few minutes. And Mark, carrying, followed the nurse into a back room brimming with stainless steel equipment and the soft beep of monitors. Scout lay on a table, IVs attached to his foreleg, a bandage wrapped around his muzzle. His eyes were half closed, but they fluttered open at their approach. At the sight of his tail gave a weak wag. She leaned over him, careful not to disturb the tubes and bandages, and ran her fingers through his fur. "You did it, buddy," she whispered. "You saved." Mark stood beside them, gazing at the dog who had just days ago been a simple, loving companion, and was now something of a guardian angel. Sensing the emotions swirling around him, quieted for a moment, his tiny hand reaching out as if he, too, wanted to touch this hero who had kept him safe. That was the beginning of the story. Or at least, it was the start of the story's transformation from a routine suburban life to a tale that would shock an entire community and beyond. For no one, not even Mark, could have anticipated the ripple effect of that one selfless act. They had no idea what it would set into motion. The media attention, the skeptics, the unexpected visitors, the revelations about Scout's past, and the culminating event that would leave everyone reeling in disbelief. Scout's recovery was slow. The vet bills mounted, and Mark found themselves juggling between taking care of and nursing Scout back to health. Neighbors dropped by with casseroles, but also with questions. They had heard bits and pieces. A dog saved a baby from a deadly snake. People wanted details. Some even showed up with cameras, trying to capture the moment. The local paper wrote a small piece on it, titling it, "Hero Dog Saves Infant from Venomous Snake." It was a feel-good story that spread like wildfire throughout the neighborhood, then the town, and eventually beyond. And Mark, though, were more focused on keeping Scout comfortable than on the whirlwind outside their doorstep. They cradled him on a makeshift bed in the living room, where the sunlight warmed the floorboards, and the curtains framed a gentle breeze. Scout's eyelids fluttered whenever crawled closer, as though he wanted to stand guard again, but his body was still too weak to move much. Despite the exhaustion, there was a spark in Scout's eyes whenever he looked at a bond forged in the heat of danger, unbreakable and profound. One afternoon, about a week after the incident, while was gingerly applying ointment to Scout's muzzle, a loud knock echoed from the front door. Mark answered it to find a local reporter clutching a notepad, a camera crew behind her. They had come to interview the hero dog and the family. They wanted to know every detail, from how Scout had been found as a stray to the harrowing moment in the nursery. Hesitated, protective of her family's privacy, but she couldn't deny that the story deserved to be told. So, gently, she allowed the crew into the living room. The camera rolled as the reporter asked about that night. Her voice trembled when she recounted the terror and cries, the dead snake, and Scout's bravery. Mark chimed in with how they rushed him to the vet, how they prayed with every mile they drove in the dead of night, hoping they wouldn't lose him. The camera then turned to Scout. Though he was still bandaged, his eyes reflected a calm dignity. As if on cue, crawled toward the dog, placed a tiny palm on his back, and giggled. The camera crew collectively sighed at the touching scene, and someone murmured, "That's adorable." The piece aired on the local news, then got picked up by a regional affiliate, then another. The short clip, capturing small hand on Scout's scruffy fur, touched hearts all across the region. People began sharing it online, on social media platforms, blogs, and message boards, often with emotional captions like, "Brave dog rescues baby from death," or "This will restore your faith in animals." Within days, the story had gone viral. Phone blew up with messages from old classmates, relatives from out of state, and even complete strangers who just wanted to send their support and admiration for Scout. At first, it was heartwarming, and Mark felt a sense of pride in Scout, and they were grateful for the outpouring of well wishes. Donations trickled in to cover the vet bills. A local pet store offered free dog food for a year. But then, as often happens with sudden viral fame, things took an unexpected turn. People began showing up at odd hours, snapping pictures through the windows, or leaving stuffed animals and letters in the mailbox. A few questionable individuals hovered around, asking bizarre questions. One man insisted Scout was part wolf and demanded a DNA test, while another said he was from an animal talent agency and wanted to sign Scout for commercials. began to feel uneasy in her own home. Mark installed a security camera to keep watch, and they took extra care when leaving the house with. As if that weren't enough, a scathing article appeared online, questioning the veracity of the dog's heroics. The writer accused the family of fabricating the story for attention. They pointed to the lack of immediate photographic evidence of the dead snake, which animal control had disposed of, and the improbability of a dog so perfectly intercepting a venomous snake in the middle of the night. Dogs simply don't have the reflexes for this, the article claimed. It went on to suggest that maybe the baby was never in real danger, that the snake might have been harmless, or that the entire incident was staged with a defanged reptile. Too, it felt like a punch to the gut. She had no reason to lie. She didn't ask for this level of scrutiny, and now her family's integrity was being questioned by faceless strangers on the internet. As the public storm raged, some championing Scout as a hero, others casting doubt, a quiet presence stepped onto the scene. An older woman, modestly dressed, with kind eyes that shimmered with curiosity, showed up at their doorstep with a folded piece of paper in her hands. Answered, immediately cautious, but the woman spoke gently, introducing herself as a researcher who specialized in canine behavior. She expressed genuine interest in Scout's story, not from a sensationalist angle, but from a deep desire to understand. "I've studied dog cognition for 30 years, explained softly. I've seen dogs perform feats of loyalty and bravery that science struggles to explain, but I've never heard of one diving into danger quite like Scout. I'd like to learn more about him, if you'll allow it." Exhausted by the flurry of attention, was initially hesitant. Yet something about sincerity put her at ease. She invited the researcher in for tea. They spoke at length about Scout's background, how he was found as a stray, malnourished and skittish, then rehabilitated into a loving family companion. Listened intently, taking notes in a small leather-bound notebook. She seemed particularly fascinated by any mention of Scout's behavior around, especially the protective instincts that had been so dramatically proven on that fateful night. Over the next few weeks, visited regularly, conducting basic, non-invasive tests. She'd bring a plush toy shaped like a snake, observing how Scout reacted. She'd note how Scout watched over when he crawled around the living room. She also examined the dog's scars and injuries, hypothesizing that Scout might have had more than one run-in with snakes in his past. Slowly, an astonishing picture began to form, one that suggested Scout's life before, and Mark was far more eventful than they had ever imagined. One afternoon, arrived looking unusually excited. She carried a dusty binder filled with clippings, photographs, and documents. "I've been digging through archives of missing dogs, strays, rescue shelters, everything I can find," she said, her voice trembling with an eagerness akin to a child unveiling a secret. "There's something you need to see." And Mark exchanged glances, uncertain. "About Scout?" asked, gently cradling who was now babbling and pulling at her hair. Nodded, then carefully opened the binder on the coffee table. Inside were black and white photographs of a dog that looked strikingly similar to Scout. The markings were near identical, right down to the patch of black around the left eye. "Is that—" Mark began. "Potentially," said, eyes gleaming. She flipped a few pages, pointing to a newspaper clipping dated nearly 9 years ago. "Family dog fights off snake, disappears." The accompanying photo showed a tearful family standing next to a younger version of the dog, bandaged around the neck. The article mentioned that the dog had saved the family's toddler from a venomous bite on a camping trip. The toddler was safe, but the dog ran off shortly after recovering. The family had searched for weeks, posting flyers, contacting shelters, but never found him. His hand flew to her mouth. "Are you saying Scout is that dog?" Shrugged, but the excitement in her eyes didn't dim. "It's a possibility. The resemblance is uncanny. And apparently, this dog had a history even before that incident. There are rumors it defended a homeless man from a mugger in a different city. There's no definitive proof, But this dog's feats became something of a local legend. Mark's brow furrowed. So you're telling us Scout might have been a hero dog several times over before he even found us? That's exactly what I'm suggesting. I can't say for sure. It would require extensive DNA testing and matching up microchip data if any existed. But from the physical descriptions to the mannerisms people recounted, it all lines up shockingly well. Paused, her voice becoming gentle. I wanted you to see this because it's extraordinary. If Scout truly is this same dog, then you've taken in a living legend of sorts, a creature with a history of saving lives against incredible odds. Looked at Scout, who lay contentedly in the sunbeam near his play mat, occasionally lifting his head to check on the baby's movements. A lump formed in her throat. How could this battered, gentle soul have such a storied past? She wasn't sure what to believe, but the possibility tugged at her heartstrings in ways she couldn't articulate. She stood, walked over to Scout and knelt. Her hand found his fur, stroking gently. "Oh, Scout," she whispered, tears pricking her eyes, "who are you really?" As if in response, Scout nuzzled her hand, then turned his attention to. The baby squealed with delight, crawling closer to his canine protector. It was a moment that felt both ordinary and extraordinary, mundane yet mystical. Felt a surge of gratitude so powerful it nearly overwhelmed her. Whether or not Scout was a storied hero of legends past didn't change the fact that he had saved her baby's life. But the idea that he might have done this before, that he was, in some strange way, destined to protect those in danger, filled her with awe. Word of theory spread quietly at first. She wrote a blog post about her observations, mentioning that this hero dog might be the same one from multiple rescue stories. She didn't name and mark explicitly, respecting their privacy. But the internet being what it is, speculation soared. Old newspaper archives were dug up by eager amateurs, matching details from one incident to another. People posted side-by-side photos of dogs from different heroic canines over the last decade, and uncanny similarities were found. A dedicated online community formed, determined to prove the dog's identity. Some were skeptics, claiming it was all just wishful thinking. Others were convinced that Scout was a veritable guardian angel in dog form. And Mark, meanwhile, watched from the sidelines, occasionally stepping in to clarify or debunk rumors, but largely trying to keep their focus on their everyday lives. And so, even as the outside world buzzed with curiosity, the family's life found a new normal. Mark went to work, balanced her duties with, and Scout slowly regained his strength. The only difference was the sense of wonder that enveloped them all. Each time Scout looked at, it was as though he was silently vowing to keep him safe, no matter what. It wasn't just a dog looking at a baby. It was a guardian gazing upon his sacred charge. Yet, for all the calm that settled in the living room, a tempest was brewing elsewhere. Rumors reached the desk of a major television network, one famous for sensational stories and dramatic. A producer saw the online chatter about a dog of many miracles and decided it would make for compelling television. They dispatched a charismatic host, accompanied by a robust camera crew, to attempt an exclusive interview with the family and to stage a dramatic reenactment of the snake rescue. Received the call one afternoon while changing his diaper, and the pitch was borderline ridiculous. They wanted to film on location, bringing in a trained, non-venomous snake for authenticity. They promised them a generous appearance fee, and even more if they consented to a DNA test on Scout to match him with older canine heroes from around the country. The host's name was Maxwell, famous for turning human interest stories into national phenomena with a flair for sensationalism. Mark was skeptical. "This feels exploitative," he said, pacing the living room while gummed on a plastic teething ring. "I agree," murmured, "but part of me wonders, if that DNA test can prove Scout's identity once and for all, wouldn't that be something? And they're offering a lot of money. You know we have a mountain of vet bills." Mark sighed. He glanced at Scout, who was back to his usual self, carrying around a squeaky toy, tail wagging whenever giggled. We don't want to stress him out, though. Plus, I'm not comfortable with them bringing any snake near or Scout or any of us. It feels too risky. They discussed it for days, weighing pros and cons. In the end, curiosity and financial necessity tipped the scales. They arranged for the show to come on a Saturday, with a strict understanding that the snake used for reenactment would be a harmless species, and that the baby and Scout would be kept safe at all times. That Saturday arrived with a flurry of activity. 2 vans parked outside the house, camera operators, producers, and the flamboyant host stepping out with confident swagger. Maxwell greeted and Mark with a pearly white grin and sweeping gestures, making a show of his excitement to cover the biggest canine mystery of the decade. Forced a polite smile, leading them into the living room, heart fluttering with unease. Mark held close, watching the crew set up lighting and microphones with an anxious eye. Scout, for his part, seemed baffled but not frightened. He sniffed at the new arrivals, wagging his tail cautiously, as if to say, "I'm not sure what's going on, but I'm here." They shot various B-roll footage. Scout curled protectively around, preparing dog food, Mark tossing a toy in the yard while watched from the porch. Then came the interview segments, with bright lights shining on and Mark's faces. Asked loaded questions in a theatrical tone. So Mark, when Scout bravely intercepted the strike of this venomous serpent, did you believe your baby would survive? Did you fear that this might be the last time you'd see him smile? The dramatics made cringe internally, but she tried to answer gracefully, emphasizing the real emotions behind that terrifying night. Mark did his best to remain composed, though he bristled at the host's hyperbole. Finally, the moment came for the reenactment. The crew set up a miniature crib in the living room, empty, of course, and brought in a snake handler holding a small, docile snake. It was clearly non-venomous, and the handler stood at a safe distance, but the whole scene felt wrong too. The camera zeroed in on Scout, who immediately caught sight of the snake. His ears flattened against his head. A low growl began in his throat. He didn't leap at it, but his posture was undeniably one of warning. Maxwell, clearly smelling ratings gold, leaned toward the camera with hushed excitement. "Ladies, and observe the primal instincts of this hero dog. See how he recognizes the serpent as a threat. Remarkable." He coaxed the handler to inch the snake a bit closer. Scout tensed, the growl growing deeper. "Stop," blurted, stepping forward. "You're scaring him. I'm not comfortable with this." She had already arranged for them not to bring the snake too close to Scout, but now seeing his distress, she couldn't bear it. "Just one more shot," pleaded, flashing that professionally polished smile. "We want to show the world how Scout reacts, to demonstrate his heroism." Scout, for his part, let out a sharp bark, eyes fixed on the snake. It was clear he was remembering the pain and fear from the venomous bite. The snake handler pulled back, whispering reassuring words to the snake. Tension crackled in the air. Finally, the director called it off, signaling they had enough footage. Shoulders sagged in relief, but something inside her twisted with guilt. She had allowed a scenario to unfold that put her dog in distress, all for a flashy TV segment. Later, they filmed a short sequence in which a veterinarian arrived to collect a DNA sample, just a simple cheek swab, from Scout. Mark distracted the dog with treats, stroking his ears to keep him calm. The sample would supposedly be compared to older samples from shelters around the country that had once processed a dog with similar markings, in hopes of finding a match. The entire process was quick and seemed painless, but couldn't shake the feeling that they were exploiting a loyal friend for the sake of a sensational story. The crew packed up, exchanging pleasantries and promising an incredible, groundbreaking episode. Then they were gone, leaving the house oddly quiet, as though a storm had just passed. Scout curled up on his bed, looking exhausted. Also tired, fussed in Mark's arms until he drifted off to sleep. Up the living room, mind whirling with doubts. Had they done the right thing? Would the segment tarnish Scout's genuine heroism, turning it into a spectacle? And if the DNA test confirmed Scout was indeed that same dog from those older articles, what then? Would more cameras come, more sensationalists trying to milk every drop of drama? A week later, the episode aired. The dramatization was intense. Ominous music, slow-motion shots of Scout growling at the snake, close-ups of wide eyes. Maxwell's described the night in near-apocalyptic terms, calling Scout the bravest dog in America and painting the family as survivors of a near-fatal tragedy. When the DNA portion came on, the show teased that results would be revealed after a commercial break. And Mark, sitting on their couch at home, clenched hands anxiously. When the segment returned, declared, "The preliminary results indicate a potential match with two separate hero dog incidents, one from 9 years ago and another from 5 years ago, both involving snakes. Further testing is required, but this dog's legacy might stretch back nearly a decade, spanning multiple states." His jaw dropped. Mark's eyes widened. They had figured the test might be inconclusive or might point to a mismatch. But to have the show present potential matches so confidently was staggering. They glanced at Scout, who lounged contentedly next his playpen. If what the show implied was true, then Scout had been saving lives, young and old, for years, sometimes at the cost of his own comfort and safety. A swirl of pride, wonder, and apprehension rushed through, because if Scout truly was that extraordinary, what next? The episode went viral. Millions watched online, and the story gained an even broader audience. Hashtags popped up. Hero Dog Scout, Legendary Rescuer Miracle Mutt. Offers rolled in from dog food companies, talk shows, and even a film studio wanting the rights to Scout's story. And Mark found themselves in the eye of a media storm they never asked for. Their phone rang incessantly, messages flooded their social media accounts, and strangers started mailing gifts to their house, collars with Hero Dog engraved, boxes of gourmet dog treats, letters detailing how Scout's story had renewed their faith in the goodness of the world. While some of it was heartwarming, it also felt overwhelming. Began to fear for her family's privacy and safety. She turned down most of the offers, feeling that no sum of money was worth turning Scout into a corporate mascot or dragging into an unrelenting spotlight. Mark supported her, though the financial incentives were tempting, especially with looming college savings for and the mortgage payments on their modest home. In the midst of all this, continued her research. She contacted the veterinarian the show had used to administer the DNA test. She wanted to confirm details, cross-reference rescue center data, and verify the show's sensational claims. One evening she came by the house, face pale, posture tense, offered her a seat, bracing herself for news. "There's a problem," said quietly. "The data the network used might not be from the dogs they claimed. There's a discrepancy in the microchip files. The older dogs from those heroic incidents were chipped, and the numbers don't match anything in the database for Scout's swab. I think the show might have fabricated some of the results to heighten the drama." His heart sank. "Are you saying Scout might not be the same dog after all?" Sighed, "I'm not sure. The network's manipulation of data doesn't necessarily prove it's untrue. It just means they might have twisted or fabricated results for better ratings. That doesn't disprove the anecdotal evidence, but it does muddy the waters considerably. I'm going to do my own checks. I've found one of the original families from the old article, and they still have some medical records of their dog. If I could compare those records to Scout's, we'd get a clearer picture." Rubbed her temples, feeling a headache coming on. She hated the idea that the truth, whatever it was being lost in a swirl of sensationalism and half-truths. "Do whatever you need to do," she said. "I just want the facts." And so pressed on with her research, diving deeper into archives, contacting anyone who might have a clue. While she did, life for Mark and Scout returned to a semblance of normal. Summer rolled in with warm breezes. Began learning to walk, wobbling around the living room on unsteady legs, squealing whenever Scout trotted alongside him. Despite the continuing swirl of online chatter, the cameras had mostly subsided, the next viral story no doubt capturing the public's attention. Then, on a humid August afternoon, everything changed again. It began innocently enough. Mark was at work, was napping, and was in the backyard, hanging laundry to dry in the sun. Scout lay nearby in the shade, panting softly. The day was peaceful, cicadas humming, the scent of fresh grass in the air. Out of nowhere, Scout stood up, ears alert, nose twitching. He let out a short bark, the hair on his neck bristling. Turned. "What is it, boy?" She followed the direction of Scout's gaze toward the tall fence that lined the yard. At first, she saw nothing. But Scout wouldn't stop barking, a frantic, alarmed tone in each yelp. Feeling a prickle of unease, walked closer to the fence. That's when she heard it, a muffled whimper followed by a choking cough. Someone was on the other side, hidden behind thick bushes as if they had collapsed there. His heart hammered. "Hello. Are you okay?" She yelled over the fence but received no coherent reply. She dashed inside, grabbed her phone, and made sure was safe in his crib. Then she ran out the front door, circled around the block to the overgrown side of her fence. Scout, acting on sheer loyalty, followed at her heels. The heat pressed down on them like a stifling blanket, but she pushed through the tall grass and weeds, ignoring the prickle of fear in her gut. When she finally reached the far corner, her stomach twisted in shock. A teenage boy lay on the ground, face pale and contorted with pain. He appeared dehydrated, eyes rolling back. A battered backpack lay nearby, contents scattered, cans of energy drinks, half-eaten snacks, with a cracked screen. His arm was swollen, marked with angry red welts that looked like insect stings or perhaps even a reaction to poison ivy. He was semi-conscious, mumbling something incomprehensible. Crouched beside him, phone clutched in her hand. "Hey, can you hear me? I'm calling an ambulance." The boy moaned, lips cracked, beads of sweat dotting his forehead. Scout sniffed his outstretched hand, whimpering in concern, then nudged the boy's neck as though trying to keep him awake. Dialed 911, voice trembling as she described the situation. The operator promised to send help immediately, instructing on basic first aid steps, checking the boy's pulse, trying to keep him conscious by talking to him, giving him small sips of water if he was able to swallow. In those tense minutes, did her best to follow instructions. She found a water bottle in his backpack, unsealed it, and trickled a bit onto his lips. The boy made a weak effort to drink, then coughed. Scanned his surroundings, noticing a cheap sleeping bag stuffed in the bushes, as though he had been camping or perhaps hiding there. A surge of compassion welled in her. Who was this boy? Why was he alone behind her fence? Sirens approached, and soon paramedics arrived, loading the boy onto a stretcher, hooking him up to IV fluids. He was delirious, but tried to speak, rasping out something about running away, about being scared. The paramedics assured they'd take him to the hospital and do their best. She stood back, holding Scout's collar. Tears sprang to her eyes. Even in the face of adversity, here was another life in peril. And Scout, ever the vigilant protector, had sensed it first. If Scout hadn't alerted her, the boy might have lain there in the scorching heat much longer, possibly too long. That evening, Mark came home to find shaken. She explained what happened. They debated what to do next. Should they try to find the boy's family, contact the hospital? But confidentiality laws meant they wouldn't get much information. The paramedics had taken her number, though, so she hoped they might call if the boy asked for them. Days passed. Checked the local hospital's directory, but privacy rules prevented staff from giving out details. Then, almost a week later, a phone call came from a social worker. The boy, whose name was Daniel, was recovering. He'd run away from a foster home several counties away, having suffered repeated bullying at school and feeling unwanted. He'd ended up wandering into their neighborhood, dehydrated, allergic to some plants, and exhausted from days of sleeping rough. His intervention had quite likely saved his life. The social worker explained that Daniel remembered a dog barking, a woman's face, water being offered. He wanted to thank them, felt a tug at her heartstrings. "Of course," she said. "He's welcome to come by once he's better. I'd love for him to meet Scout properly." About a week later, on a mild evening, a car pulled up outside in Mark's house. Daniel stepped out, accompanied by the social worker, his head bowed shyly. He wore clean clothes, though they were slightly big for his frame, and his hair was trimmed. Greeted him warmly, ushering him inside. Scout padded into the hallway, tail swishing with curiosity. At the sight of the dog, Daniel's eyes lit up. He sank to his knees, tentatively holding out a hand. Scout sniffed it, then nuzzled his head against the boy's chest, tail wagging gently. Daniel let out a choked laugh, tears brimming in his eyes. "I remember hearing barking when I could barely move," he said, voice trembling. "I thought I was hallucinating. I was so scared, thank you." Swallowed a lump in her throat, kneeling beside him. "Don't thank me. Scout was the one who found you. He wouldn't stop barking until I went to check. It's him you should thank." Daniel scratched Scout behind the ears, his expression soft. "Then thank you, Scout," he whispered, voice breaking. Over dinner, Mark cooked a simple pasta dish. They learned bits of Daniel's story. He'd bounced between foster homes for years, never feeling fully accepted or safe. He admitted to being bullied at school, feeling isolated. Running away had felt like his only option. His heart broke for him. She wasn't sure what they could do, but she felt a powerful urge to help him in some way. The social worker explained that Daniel was in a temporary group home, while a more stable, long-term foster or adoption placement was sought. She also mentioned that Daniel had a love for animals, dogs especially, and that spending time with Scout might be therapeutic. And Mark exchanged a glance. They both felt it, an unspoken agreement blossoming in their hearts. They offered to let Daniel visit whenever possible, to spend time with Scout, or even help around the house. The social worker beamed at the suggestion, and Daniel's eyes shone with hope. Thus began a new chapter in the family's life. Daniel started visiting on weekends, taking Scout for walks, learning basic dog training techniques, and even joining Mark in small home improvement projects. Watched him transform from a timid boy into someone who dared to smile, to dream, to trust again. And it was Scout who seemed to be the catalyst for that change. Scout, who had once been a stray and knew what it felt like to be abandoned, and who now radiated unconditional love to a boy who so desperately needed it. Meanwhile, continued her research quietly, keeping updated. She admitted it was difficult to get definitive proof that Scout was the same dog who had performed those heroics years ago. The records were incomplete, and the network's shady involvement had compromised some data. Still, she maintained that whether or not Scout was a legendary dog from multiple past rescues, his capacity for empathy and protection was undeniable. As summer gave way to autumn, bright leaves swirling across the sidewalk, the viral fame had all but died down. The sensational news cycle had moved on, and Mark were grateful for the calmer, more meaningful rhythm of their lives. They spent crisp weekends with Daniel and sometimes visiting the local park where would toddle around on the grass, giggling, while Daniel tossed a frisbee to Scout. It was a simple, healing kind of joy. But fate had one more shocking twist in store for them, one that would forever seal Scout's status, not just in the hearts of this family, but in the hearts of everyone who would learn of it. It happened on a windy October evening. The sun had set, casting long shadows on the suburban streets. Daniel was over for dinner, as was becoming a cherished routine, and was in his high chair playing with mashed sweet potatoes. Mark had just started clearing the table while chatted with Daniel about his schoolwork. They were all startled when the phone rang, a piercing trill that sliced through the cozy. Answered. On the other end was the social worker, her voice strained. She explained that the group home where Daniel stayed had caught fire. Some of the kids and staff were still inside, trapped by the flames. Firefighters were en route, but it was chaos. The woman wasn't sure how to handle Daniel's return that evening. Would it even be safe? Daniel paled, dropping his fork. My friend is there. He's only 10. What if he's trapped? His heart lurched. She turned on the TV, flipping to the local news. Sure enough, there it was, a live feed of roaring flames engulfing the older building. Smoke billowed into the sky, illuminated by the red glow of emergency lights. Firefighters struggled to control the blaze. Mark hung up the phone, face grim. We have to do something." Daniel stood, eyes wide with panic. "I can't just stay here while my friends—" He didn't finish. He didn't have to. Everyone felt it, the urgent need to help. Making a quick plan, they gathered warm clothes, bottled water, and a first aid kit. Daniel insisted on going, hesitated but saw the determination in his face. Scout barked, tail stiff, as if sensing the urgency. They climbed into the car with safely strapped in, not wanting to leave him behind. The drive was a blur of adrenaline, the radio crackling with updates about the spreading inferno. They arrived to find a scene of pandemonium. Fire engines lined the street, hoses snaking across the pavement, anxious onlookers kept back by police tape. Flames licked the night sky, painting the area in shades of orange and red. The heat was intense, even from a distance. Daniel's eyes darted around, searching for any sign of his friends. Reached for his arm, but he broke away, weaving through the crowd until he found a police officer. "My friend. He's still inside." He cried. The officer shook his head. "We're doing everything we can, son. The building's unstable. We can't let anyone else in until the firefighters secure an entry point." Daniel's face twisted with despair. Scout whimpered, pawing the ground, as though he, too, could sense the life-or-death stakes. Suddenly, an anguished scream erupted from behind the police barricade. A staff member from the group home stumbled forward, coughing, tears streaming down her soot-streaked face. "He didn't get out. We couldn't reach him in time." She collapsed to her knees, wailing. Daniel's eyes met an unspoken plea, shook her head, voice trembling. "Daniel, the fire department." But he was already moving, slipping past the barricade in a burst of desperation. Scout, as if commanded by an unspoken bond, followed. Mark lunged to stop them, but they were too quick. Before anyone could react, Daniel and Scout disappeared into the swirling smoke at the edge of the crumbling door, slipping past the chaos of shouting firefighters and the roar of the blaze. His heart stopped. She screamed for help, terror coursing through her veins. Mark sprinted after them, but an enormous firefighter blocked his path, yelling that it was too dangerous. Time became a horrifying standstill. Sirens, screams, the crackle of burning wood. She clutched clothes, tears streaming, as Mark begged the firefighters to go after Daniel and Scout. They tried, several of them charging into the building, only to be repelled by falling debris and walls of flame. Inside the inferno, Daniel's lungs burned from the toxic mix of heat and smoke. He coughed violently, eyes stinging. Still, he pressed on, calling out's name. Walls groaned, threatening collapse. Embers drifted through the air like malevolent fireflies. Scout stayed at Daniel's side, barking intermittently as though trying to guide him. They navigated a hallway of flickering lights and thick smoke, reaching a half-collapsed bedroom door. Daniel heard faint coughing from within. Summoning every ounce of courage, he shouldered the door, inching it open enough to slip inside. The heat was staggering, the smoke disorienting. Lay curled under a bed, covering his face with a blanket. He was trembling, face flushed. At the sight of Daniel, his eyes flickered with recognition. "I can't breathe," he rasped. Daniel crouched, tugging the younger boy out, cradling him against his side. "Come on, we're getting out." His voice cracked, his own breath ragged. He pulled toward the door. Scout barked urgently, nudging their legs to push them forward. The hallway was now an inferno, flames dancing along the walls. Smoke blurred everything into shades of black and orange. Daniel coughed again, vision swimming. Just when he thought they couldn't go on, Scout darted forward a few feet, barking repeatedly as though encouraging them. They followed, stumbling over fallen beams. Pieces of ceiling crashed down around them. Every step felt like a gamble with death. Somehow, they reached a side entrance, a path the firefighters had briefly cleared. Daniel kicked away a burning plank and fresh air rushed in, swirling with ash. Scout bounded ahead, barking at the firefighters outside. The chaos was deafening, hoses spraying, men shouting, flames roaring. But as soon as the firefighters spotted Daniel and they rushed to help, strong arms pulled them out, leading them to paramedics waiting at the edge of the property. Daniel collapsed onto the grass, gasping for air, clinging to him. Scout staggered behind them, coughing from the smoke. The next moments were a blur of oxygen masks, hands checking pulses, frantic cries of relief. His face appeared above Daniel, tears streaking her cheeks, as Mark cradled, murmuring reassurances. Someone carefully picked up Scout, checking him for burns or smoke inhalation. "They're alive," a firefighter shouted. Applause and cheers erupted from the crowd that had gathered beyond the barricade. Daniel's chest heaved, adrenaline still surging. He looked at, eyes glistening. "We did it," he whispered, voice muffled by the oxygen mask. Just nodded, tears in his soot-streaked eyes. Later, once they were certain Daniel and were stable, the paramedics let and Mark come closer. Scout was panting, his fur singed in places, but he was alive. The news crews had arrived by then, cameras capturing the aftermath of the heroic rescue. Hugged Daniel, sobbing uncontrollably. "You could died," she whispered. "What were you thinking?" "That he's my friend," Daniel said quietly, pointing to who was being treated by another medic. "And Scout, he let us through. He saved us." Mark crouched beside Scout, gently patting his head, tears of relief streaming down his face. "You never stop, do you, buddy? You just keep saving us." It was a moment that soared beyond the realm of mere news headlines or viral videos. It was raw, real, life-affirming. The cameras captured every second, the tears, the smoke-streaked faces, the trembling arms of reunited friends. By the time they all arrived at the hospital, word was spreading like wildfire. People on social media posted clips of Daniel emerging from the smoke, in his arms, Scout guiding them. The legend of this dog, whether or not he'd been a hero multiple times in the past, was now sealed in present-day reality, witnessed by dozens of onlookers. No one could dispute it this time. Over the following days, as the community to support the children displaced by the fire, calls poured in from across the nation. Daniel and Scout were hailed as heroes on every major news outlet. Offers of adoption for Daniel flooded the social worker's office. The group home staff tearfully thanked Daniel for his bravery, calling him an angel in disguise. For Daniel, who had once felt unwanted and invisible, it was an overwhelming surge of love and recognition. And Scout? Well, Scout was just the same old dog to those who knew him best. He still curled up its feet, still trotted faithfully after, still wagged his tail at Daniel whenever he visited. But to everyone else, he had become a legend, the dog who saved a baby, and then went on to guide a young boy through a blazing inferno to rescue another child. The truth of his past rescues, once debated, now seemed almost irrelevant. He'd proven his heroism again and again, in the present, beyond the shadow of a doubt. The final shock came 2 weeks after the fire, in the form of an official letter. It was from the family who had lost their dog nearly 9 years ago, the one that suspiciously resembled Scout in newspaper clippings. They wrote, "We've seen the news. We've followed the story. While we can't be certain it's the same dog, we wanted to reach out and say thank you for giving him a loving home, for protecting him, and for allowing him to continue saving lives. Whether or not he's our long-lost friend, it's clear he's with the right family now. May he continue to bring miracles to those who need them." Read the letter aloud to Mark, tears in her eyes. "What do we do?" she asked. "Do we respond? Do we ask for a DNA test or—" Mark took her hand gently. "Maybe we just say thank you, that we love him and that he's home now." And that's what they did. In a heartfelt reply, they expressed gratitude for the family's courage to reach out, acknowledging that no matter who Scout used to be, he was theirs now, and they were his. The letter ended with, "You'll always have a friend here, and so will Scout." In the end, the question of Scout's identity, whether he was indeed the same dog who had performed those past acts of heroism, faded into the background. He was, undeniably, a hero in the here and now, having saved Baby, discovered Daniel, and guided him to rescue. Skeptics who once poked holes in the snake story were silenced by the footage of the fire rescue. For the local community, and the broader world that learned of these events, Scout became a symbol of unwavering loyalty and courage. The final days of autumn brought a quiet peace to and Mark's home. The group home began its rebuilding process and found a new foster family who promised to nurture him. Daniel, after many heartfelt discussions, was offered a permanent home with Mark, an adoption process that would take time, but which filled him with cautious hope. He and, despite the age gap, had formed an unbreakable bond, often playing together in the living room under Scout's watchful gaze. On one crisp evening, while Mark lit the fireplace and dozed in his lap, Daniel sat on the rug, resting his head against Scout's flank. The dog let out a gentle sigh. A cozy hush filled the room. The entire tumult of the past few months, the viral fame, the controversies, the near-death experiences, felt distant like a half-remembered dream. What remained was an overwhelming sense of gratitude and love. Daniel gazed at the fire, then at the family around him. With a trembling voice, he said, "I used to think heroes only existed in comics or movies. But real heroes, sometimes they're just good people, or good dogs, and they show up when you need them most." Reached out to ruffle his hair. "Yes, they do." Scout gave a small bark as though agreeing, then laid his head down on his paws. The flames danced in the fireplace, casting flickering light across the walls. Outside, the wind rustled through fallen leaves, the season steadily marching toward winter. But in that living room, warmth and safety reigned. They were a family, imperfect, brought together by fate and necessity, and made stronger by a scruffy, unassuming dog whose heart was big enough to hold them all. And in the days and years that followed, whenever someone asked about the miraculous dog who had saved a baby's life, and about the boy he later guided through flames, would smile and say, "He's right here, living his best life, just being who he is." Because that was the truth. Scout didn't need a spotlight or a certificate of heroism. His very existence, filled with acts of quiet courage and boundless love, was proof that miracles can walk among us on four paws, wagging a tail, forever altering the fabric of our lives for the better. That truth, dear reader, is what will shock you most. Not the flames, nor the venomous fangs, nor the attention-grabbing headlines, but the simple revelation that in a world often marred by selfishness and doubt, a single dog's unconditional loyalty and fierce devotion can save not just a life, but many lives, and can heal hearts that seemed irreparably broken. It is a testament to the power of love, love that leaps into danger, love that stands guard through the darkest night, and love that remains steadfast, long after the headlines fade, keeping watch at the foot of a crib or guiding a lost soul home. And that is the enduring legacy of Scout, a reminder that real heroes, human or canine, rise from the most unlikely of places, quietly rewriting destinies with every wag of a tail and every act of selfless courage.